So I have two containers. So you can actually see there is something like mount. This is the information, right? So let me actually try to create the containers. Hope you're clear with Funny's question. So Funny is asking like yesterday, like when we created anonymous containers, like how so I just said like so there is no way to identify like to which container this particular volume belongs to by looking at like Docker volumes and Docker volumes ls kind of thing, right? So let's actually dig deep into that and see like how we can actually identify. This is a syntax for creating a volume, right? And this is the volume created, right? So now let's inspect this particular container. Okay. Open the Docker inspect. So we got like a lot of information. So Funny here you can actually see so mounts. I'll just show you in my notepad first. So Docker inspect the container name. So when you do that, so you're
Okay.
able to identify like the mount names. Okay, so for all these mounts, so this is the volume that is actually associated with, and the destination is something like data volume 1, and this is the volume name.
Okay. So, so it will be fetching from here when we try to use it for another different container.
Yeah. So Docker volumes less. So you can actually see BC4E4, right? So BC4E4. So what I mean to say is like, so when you have multiple anonymous container names in the volume, so and there are like hundreds of containers associated running on your machine. Okay. So you
Okay.
cannot actually, so you need to get into the container, each and every container and see to which container does this volume belongs to, right?
Right. Right.
Yeah, so there is an option, Docker volume inspect. We'll also see this, inspect the volume. Yeah, so if you inspect the volume, so you're not able to identify to which container this volume is actually associated.
Okay.
Okay,
Yeah.
so when you have like hundreds of containers, so it will be obviously difficult, right? So to identify like
Right.
which container this volume actually belongs to. So you need to either have a script or loop through each of these containers and then find out like so to which container it actually belongs to.
Okay. Got it now.
Okay, so this is clear, right?
Right.
Yeah. So any other questions? Others like, so did you actually start practicing it or what's the status like? So okay, so let's get started. Okay, for that, I'll delete my container. So I have only Kubernetes related container. So in the first session, like what we saw, excuse me. So in the first session, like we saw what a container is actually, and then what images are, and also we saw like from where like we can actually get these images. Like usually we get these images from the Docker Hub. because like that is the default image store for these containers. We also saw like a few, we didn't actually see, but we discussed that there are like other registries like Google Azure registry and then AWS registry and Google registry where you can actually store your containers images. And also we saw like what a private repository is, what private image, and then what public images are actually. Then we downloaded like one of the container using like Docker pull command, and after that, like we executed that particular. We created a container from that image using like a Docker run. So after that, like we saw like we took like Nginx container. So after that, like we saw how we can expose a port from the container to the external host. Okay, so and in the second session, like yesterday's session, what we did is like, so we saw something related to these volumes. So how volumes are actually useful. So basically like it persists the data in the volume. Okay. So yeah, so these are some of the items like which we saw yesterday. Today we'll see something related to networking. So let's say like we have multiple containers and then multiple images and multiple containers. So ideally, like we will have, let's take an example of a software application. So we'll have logic related to UI, logic related to API, and then a logic related to all the database. So these are the bare minimal things that are actually required. So apart from that, like you might have other softwares like Redis Cache or other NoSQL databases like MongoDB or something like that, right? So an application consists of like multiple containers, and obviously these containers are supposed to communicate with each other. So for example, like if you take an example which I mentioned in the previously, like so software application, your UI code runs in one container, and then your API code, like it runs either like PHP, Python, or .NET code. So it runs in another container. So this UI code can actually communicate with the API code via like external host. Okay, so that should be fine. But the API code, it is supposed to communicate with a database, right? So it is not always required to expose your SQL database or MySQL database to the host machine or to the external world. If it is exposed to just API, so that should be fine, right? So now we'll see like how we can actually communicate. So now we can actually see like how we can now we see like how different containers can actually communicate with each other and all that stuff. Today we'll focus on the networking concept. So just give me a second. Yeah, so let's get back to our presentation. So we saw like three different volumes like yesterday, like one is anonymous volume and then named volumes and then host volumes. Okay, so now let's actually go through these so networking concept. Okay, so there are like two different types of networking which are actually present in Docker. So one is like a default bridge and the other one is like user defined networks. So by default, like Docker actually provides like a way to communicate between these containers uh, using like something called as a bridge. Okay, and then apart from that, like you can also create your own networks, like so, and then uh, communicate between like multiple containers. So let's see like when this default bridge and when these user defined networks are actually useful. Okay. So what is this default bridge? So this is the default one that is provided by Docker, and usually like I don't recommend this for not only me, like anyone, they don't actually recommend this for production environments. So I'll also tell you the reason why this is not actually supported. This is not actually recommended for the production. Okay. Um, so let's execute some commands. So Docker network ls. So this is a command for looking at like different kinds of networks. So just ignore these items, like this is the one that I use. So you can actually see, so this is the default one. So bridge, which is actually created by Docker itself. Okay. Yeah, so you can, so there are like other items, like other default one is host. So when you execute this command like Docker network ls, so you'll be seeing mostly these two items like bridge and host. Okay. So the other three are specific to my machine. So I just created them previously. Okay, so this is the command to look at like what are all the default networks available. Okay, so let's actually inspect one of this network ID. Okay, so when you just inspect this particular network, like, so you can actually do Docker network ls and then get the network ID. So, and you can just use this command like Docker network inspect so and so. Just give me a second. Yeah. Uh, Yeah, so when you do like a Docker network inspect and then use this network ID, like you'll be seeing different options. Like, so this is the information related to the network. Like you can actually see the gateway and then subnets. So don't ask me like more questions related to what gateway is subnet. So I'm a little weak in that area. Uh, so apart from that, like you can also see containers, like so containers that actually use this particular network. So right now this is actually empty. So because I don't have any containers running, so you can see like, so these are the containers that are related to Kubernetes. So apart from this, like I don't have any other containers created. So let me actually create one container. Okay, so I'm not specifying any network related information, right? Um, Yeah, so I'm not specifying any network related information. So let me execute this, and one particular container is actually created. So now let's again do this network inspect. Okay. So now you can actually see the container. So the name of the container is Pawan Web, and then the IP address of this particular thing is like 172.17.0.2. So let me actually create like another container. So this time, like what I'll actually do is, so this is actually using like, I mean, so this is using like the default image, right? So in the Nginx web. So yesterday, like we saw a host. So this when we execute like 8081 localhost 8081, you'll see this default page. So yesterday, like I explained you like how we can actually expose the code that is present on your host machine onto the Docker container, right? Um, 1 second. Yeah. So this is the other file like which I created, index.html file, and I'll just expose this particular file. This is supposed to. Yeah. So I'll just expose, I mean, overwrite the default file. So how can I overwrite the default file? So I'll just specify like the current working directory. So my current working directory in the sense like this folder. So I'll just host my current working directory into the default path, like where these HTML files are actually stored. So this is the path like where the information is HTML files are actually stored on the server, on the container. Okay, so I'm just pointing my current working directory to this working directory. So this directory. Okay. So I'll just execute this. I should actually change the name of the container because I already have one container running with the same name and also the port number. Okay, so till now, like I'm not actually specifying any network related commands. So these are the basic commands like which we saw in the past two sessions. So I created two containers, 8081 and other one is like 8082. So local. So this is the second container. So this is a response from second container and this is from the first container, right? So hope you got the difference, right? Now let's see. So Docker inspect, let me do Docker inspect networks. And this is the default bridge network. So here, like if you see, so both of these containers, like container one, like Pawan Web one, as well as like Pawan Web, so they're actually pointing to the same in bridge, like bridge network, like the default network. Okay. So the default network has following containers, this one and this one. So now let's see. So if we are able to communicate between these two networks. So these are like, as I mentioned, so Docker is all an isolation, right? So an isolation in the sense, so Docker is all an isolation. So one container is actually independent from another container. So a way to communicate between these containers is using this network. Okay, let's see like how we can actually communicate between these containers. Okay, let me actually copy these IP addresses. Okay, so now let me log in into each of these containers. Docker exec minus IT and then Pawan underscore web. Okay, so I'm inside this container. So I'll also open another instance of, yeah, so this is like I'm inside this first container. So first container is actually running actual Nginx space, whereas like the second container contains like overridden file. So now let's try to ping this particular thing. Okay, so this is the second Pawan underscore web one. This belongs to like Pawan underscore web, right? So I'm inside this particular IP. Okay. So I'm just trying to access this particular the website that is hosted in this container. Okay. Let me actually copy this. So before that, like I'll just install curl on this particular Linux instance. So apt get update and then apt get install curl. So this will install like curl. So if anyone is actually new to curl, curl is nothing but like, so you use Postman and all this stuff, right? So these curl is actually used for making HTTP calls. So you're seeing that. So curl is actually installed. So let me actually ping this particular thing. So this is my second. I'm just trying to ping Power Web one, which is having this host name, right? So it is actually running on 8082 port. 8082 connection refused. Oh, okay, so let me check that. So this is the default web bridge, right? So Docker network inspect and then so I should actually call this. So I'll be calling this other website one. One second. One second, like I'm just, it should actually connect. I understood the problem. Actually, so we should not actually give this particular port number over here. Like when I'm initially, like if you see, I'm just trying to connect over here, like using the port number. But as I mentioned earlier, like this port number 8082, so this is actually used for exposing AT port running on the container to external world, which is nothing but like the host machine, right? So in this case, like these are, we are trying to use this internal communication, like, so we are not communicating via the host machine. So it is something like, uh, so it is something like this. So this is Docker host. This is my Docker host, and then this is my Docker engine. Okay. So the host and this particular one, so they communicate via 8082 or the port exposed 8082. Okay. So this is my host machine, and this is my engine. Okay. And this is my container, and this is my other container. Okay, so I have like two containers, right? So container two. So inside this container, like it is actually exposed via 80 port only. Like Nginx is running on 80 port, and even this one is running on 80 port. And the IP number associated with this particular container is, so with this one is this. This is the container, and this is the other one. Okay, container two. So if we want to communicate with any of these containers from the external world, like this, we use like the port, external port. But if we want to communicate between these two, so we have something like a bridge over here. Okay. So this is the bridge like which we saw. So the communication actually doesn't actually go to the host machine. So it goes to this, and then from there it goes to this machine. So that is the reason why like it is not actually, we are not supposed to provide this 8082 or 80181. Okay. So you can actually see, so I'm trying to call, like, so I'm on Pawan Web. So Pawan Web has the default one. I mean, the default Nginx space, right? 8081. This is the default Nginx space. So from this particular container, I'm just trying to make a call to the other container, which has like a customized HTML file. And you can see the result. Like, so when I did like curl 172.17.0.3, so I'm getting this customized data, customized HTML file. Now, okay, the same way, like if you try to get into the other machine, okay, so on the other machine, like also you need to install curl. So We are on the second machine in the sense like web 1. So we need to call this particular thing. So 172.1. Okay. So you can actually see this information. Okay. So if you want to also see the network IP address of this particular machine, so you can also do like in Linux, you can actually get IP info. Sorry. So IP config here. So okay, so any experts from Linux environment, like they can actually let me know, or we'll just skip that and you can actually try that. So you'll get like if you do so in Windows, like you have IP config. So the same command, like if you use in Linux, like similar kind of command, you'll get the IP address. So and you'll see, so as you're in the second container, so you'll see this particular IP address over there, like. Okay. So is it clear like what in default bridge is and how it is actually useful for communication between containers, or any questions before proceeding with the further topic?
Pawan, I have a question.
Yeah.
So can we send like any kind of data from one container to other one?
Sorry, Nai.
Yeah. So are we able to send like any kind of data between these two containers?
So any kind of data between these two containers. So what do you mean by any kind of data?
I mean, like let's say if I have we are seeing like HTML content, right? So one is like modified one, and the other one is like default one. Welcome to Nginx. We have a message, right?
Mm.
So can I like pass the let's say we have a string data in one container. So can I pass the same data to the other one?
String data in the sense like, so if you want to pass, so there are like ways. So if it is like a file or text file, so you can actually use volumes. So,
Okay.
or if you want to pass, so I don't exactly understand like, so how you want to pass. So do you want to pass it via like a RESTful services or something of that kind? So if that is the case, like you can actually make an internal IP addresses based HTTP calls.
Okay. Okay.
So you cannot actually copy paste the data. String is nothing but like something, some value which is present in the memory, right? So in order to send the data, like if you want to save that in a text file and then send it to the other machine, so you can use volumes. Okay. Okay. Any other questions? So Naik, am I clear?
Yeah. Yes, Pawan.
Okay. Okay. So any other questions? So no questions, right? So I'll just proceed with the other topic. Okay. Yeah. So did we cover everything like? Okay. So one thing what you should observe is like, so you cannot you can only communicate via the IP address. Okay. So between these two containers, like, so you'll have like IP address of each of these containers when you do like Docker network inspect and then network ID. So using these IP addresses, like you can actually communicate. So do you see any drawback with these IP addresses? So do you think like these IP addresses will be same always? Any guess?
I was thinking like they will change, Pawan.
Yeah, so obviously, like you cannot actually guarantee that like these are the IP addresses that are actually associated with these containers. And moreover, like if you create like n number of containers, like if you have hundreds of containers, so you need to keep track of all these IP addresses And then so if it is like a config file, so basically like the communication between the database and then API server, so it happens like so you'll call it from the code, right? So obviously like you need to store the IP address somewhere, and it will be a bit difficult. Like if the IP addresses changes every time, like you need to update the configuration files all the time, and this is not a feasible solution. So that is the reason why like this is not recommended in production environment. Like without using like IP addresses, like you cannot actually communicate between these two. Okay. So that is one thing. So and Bridge is the default network provided by Docker, and you can actually see like all available networks via using this command like Docker network ls. And further details, like you can actually specify like either the network name or network ID, Docker network inspect network name or network ID, and you'll get some information like this. And default bridge, like we already saw this, and we also saw this example, like we ran like two containers, and then we read like a curl command with from one container to the other container. Okay. So now let's get back to what user-defined container, user-defined networks are, and then we'll see like how they'll be useful. So let me actually delete this network. To delete a network like Docker network RM, and you can specify this. Okay. So it is actually deleted. So now let me try to create a new network. So the command for that is Docker network. You should actually specify the name of this network. So for one, I mean, so my bridge. Okay, so network is actually created. So my bridge. So this is the network which is created. So though we created the network, like this doesn't get applicable. This is not actually attached to any containers, right? So we created a network and it is on the parking lot. So we need to use this network. So let's create a container now. So I'll delete uh, these two items, or let me keep them as it is, and then I'll create like a few more containers. Now I have two containers. So these two containers are actually on default bridge, and I'll be creating like few more containers, which will be on my custom network. Okay. So I'll 2 and 3. So 2, this is the container name, and this will be the IP address. So I'll do, and I can actually specify something like this. So network. So my network name is like my bridge. Right. Okay, PowerWeb2 is already in use. So it is saying like PowerWeb2 is already in use. So I created another container. So I'll also create like another container with the default values. Okay, so I'm doing like Docker run -itd and exposing port 8084 and pointing it to 80 on the container. So I'm just specifying like my network as like my bridge. So and then name is actually like PowerWeb4, and then so this is my image name. Okay, so I have like 4 images, and then we'll see like so what how the network inspect actually looks like now. So newly created 2 images are actually using my user-defined network, right? So Docker network, yes. So this is the default one, and this is my one. So I'll just use this. after network inspect and then the name of the network. So let me copy this content somewhere. Okay, so I'll also have another one. I'm just inspecting my other container. And I did a network inspect of both the default one and then my custom one. So now if you see, so this is the default one, right? So we have only two containers. So the newly created two containers where I specified like network as my bridge. So that is the custom one which I created. So they are not included in this particular that are not associated with the default bridge. So you can actually see. So this has only web1 and Pawan web. OK, whereas like my custom bridge, so it has other two containers, web3 and web4. OK, so now we are clear, right? So now let's see how we can actually communicate. So these two items are on different networks, right? Now we'll see if we are able to communicate between these two, between the containers. OK. So now I'll just go to this particular thing. So this is my web1. So I'll log in into the web1 part. Yes, I do. So I'll just try to ping another machine that is another container, which is on my other network. OK, so this is the IP, right? 172.20.02. So you can see it is not able to communicate with the containers that are present in my other network. So you're seeing this, right? So it is not able to communicate. So now let's see like if you are able to communicate with another container in the same bridge, same network. OK. So this one I'm able to communicate, but whereas like I'm not able to communicate with the container that is on the other network. So this is how like you can actually separate group together like multiple containers into different network groups. So all the containers which need to have access, so they'll be into one network, and all the containers which doesn't actually need any access, so they'll be on other containers. OK, so is it clear? So is this clear? Like,
Yes, Pawan.
OK, so now we'll see. Yeah, now we'll see another item. So let me get into my bridge. So the custom one which I created. OK, so this is Pawan Web 3 and Web 4. So these are the new containers, right? I need to install curl. OK, so I did install curl. So in my previous examples, what I mentioned is like, so if this one will be able to communicate with this particular container using the IP address, right? So I'm inside the web3, right? So let me actually try to ping this particular IP. All this web API. Yeah. So you see, like, so I'm able to copy this, right? So another advantage with this is, so instead of specifying the IP, so I can simply specify container name. OK. So even though like I specify without specifying IP, so just by specifying the container name, like I'm able to communicate with this, with the other machine. So this is clear, right? So you're in Web3, Pawan Web3, and you're able to communicate with the Pawan Web4 by simply specifying the container name. OK. So let's see if this is actually possible with the other one, like default bridge. So you're following, right? I'm not going too fast, right?
Yeah, yes, fine.
So I'm just logging in into the other container, like web container web1. So which is on a default bridge. Okay. So it already has curl. So web1, like I just wanted to communicate with this web. Yeah, so from web1, I wanted to communicate this with this web. So I'll just use this curl. I'm just using the IP address, and using IP address, like I'm able to communicate. So without IP address, like even though if I specify this container name, so it is not able to recognize this, could not resolve host Pawan web. You understood, right? So this is another reason like why we are not supposed to use. So if you are actually, so here in this case, like my previous example, so I'm able to call, I mean, invoke this particular second container, not only with the IP address, but with the name of the container. But with the default bridge, like it is not actually possible. So you need to specify the IP address explicitly. So the advantage with this approach, like using the container name for calling, I mean, for instead of the IP address, is something like this. So your container names will be almost similar. So you have a control on what container name you should give, right? So let's say like your API will be named as like API container, and then a database will be named as like a DB container. So always like you can actually specify like in your connection strings or in your other environmental related information. So instead of specifying this IP address, like you can just simply specify the container name. So if you're trying to call DB from API, so you can simply call DB and then whatever the port name of MongoDB or SQL Server. Okay. So is it clear?
Yeah, yes.
Okay. So everyone is clear, right? I don't actually listen from other people. Like, so there are almost 12 people. So if you're not able to catch up, like you can actually see my recordings, or you can even go through internet and then at least like try to follow. Like, so when you're actually, I'm hoping like everyone is actually following. Okay, so we saw like what are the advantages of like default, what are the, I mean, so what a network is actually, and then what a default bridge is, and what a user defined, how a user defined bridge is actually created, network is created, and what are the advantages of like user defined network. So one of the major advantages, like, so you'll be able to communicate with the container name as host name instead of the IP addresses. Okay. So that is the advantage with user-defined networks. Okay. Yeah. So we saw like how to create a network, and then we also saw like how a network. So list all the networks and inspect a specific network, right? So we saw like few various examples. So connecting a running container to a network. Okay. So let's say in my previous example, like what I did, so I just tried to connect like, so I tried to connect this particular thing, like, so Pawan Web 1 to Pawan Web 3, which is on a different network altogether. So these containers are already in running state, so you cannot actually stop them. And then, so it is not actually intention. I mean, so it is not actually good to stop a running container and then attach a network, right? So we'll see like, is there a process to attach a network? So this is the command like to do that. Docker network connect. So so which network like we wanted to connect and which container we wanted to connect. So my bridge. Connect my bridge to my first container. So my first container in the sense like Pawan Web 1. Okay. So I just connected like Pawan Web 1. So this is in default bridge, right? So I'm just connecting this particular Pawan Web to my other user defined bridge. So now let's inspect both of these items, like both of these networks. So now you can see, so along with Pawan Web 3, Pawan Web 1, and there is also Pawan Web 4. So previously we used to have only Web 3 and Web 4. So now we also added like Pawan Web 1. So now we'll see like if I'm able to communicate between these items. So from Pawan Web 1 to Pawan Web 3. So from Pawan Web 1 to Pawan Web 3. So for that, like I'll just go into that particular container from into the Web 1 container. So I'll do curl. So Pawan Web 3, right? So I'm just trying to connect. Okay, so I'm able to connect to this Pawan Web 3. So which I'm not able to do previously. So this is how like you can actually attach in network to a already running container. Okay, so Docker network connect, and then so the name of the network, and then the name of the container. Okay, so this is one thing. Yeah, so one advantage is like what we saw is like, so using name networks, like we are able to communicate using the container name as host name instead of IP addresses. So that is one of the major advantages. Also, like what you need to understand is like, so the bridge network can only be used for communication between containers that reside on the same host. So what does that mean? So let's say this is my host 1. Okay, this is my host machine 1. In the sense like, so this is EC2, so this is one server, and then like have another server with same configuration. So we usually do multi deployments, right? So we have like same kind of stuff over on the second container. So second host machine. So this is my host machine too. So using this network bridge, so I'm able to connect only between these two containers, only the containers that are present on the same host machine. So you cannot actually do a cross host machine communication. So this is not actually possible. So I mean, so you cannot actually use like bridge net type of network for communication between like containers in different hosts. Okay, so this is one thing. So in order to solve that purpose, like so for cross communication, cross container, I mean, so in order to communicate between containers on different hosts, so you need to use something like overlay network driver or MacVLAN driver. So I'll just do a quick Docker documentation. Yeah, so these are the other two. So I cannot actually show this right now because like I have only one machine, host machine. So on my laptop, in order to show this, like I need to have like multiple nodes and then containers created on multiple nodes. So you can actually go through this thing like theoretically. So this is like these are the two things like which can be used for cross communication, cross network communication between cross hosts. Overlay network driver and then Mac VLAN driver. Okay. So are you so from with this like we are actually done with this networking concept, and do you have any questions for me?
So can we? So can a container contains two networks? Hello.
Yeah. Hello.
Can a container have two networks, sir?
So can a container have two networks? Yeah, obviously. Like so in this example, like so when we did like network inspect web bridge, okay, my bridge. So this is my custom bridge, right? So and this has Pawan Web 1. So let me inspect my default bridge. Okay. So you can here also, like you can see Pawan Web 1. So Pawan Web 1 has 2 containers. I mean, so it is associated with the 2 networks. So I'll also tell you one more thing when you should actually use this attach command, like we saw like Docker network connect, right? So when this should be used. So ideally, like in one of my examples, like when I'm actually creating a container, so I just specified like my network as so and so, right? My bridge. So here, like if you want to specify multiple networks, so that is not actually possible through the command. So you can only specify only one network at the time of container creation. So if you want to associate this particular container with another bridge, so you need to use this command, Docker network connect. Okay.
Okay, sir.
So with this, like our Web 1 is actually present in 2 networks, right? So what is actually happening is, so this Web 1 is shared with like 2 different networks. So network 1 and then network 2. So you'll have communication something like this. So it is something, let's assume this is container 3 and 4. Okay. And we also have a bridge over here, like this is my bridge, this is my bridge, and this is the default bridge. So what we did, so we established connectivity between these two containers using my bridge. And at the same time, like I also established a connectivity between this one and this one. Okay. So let's assume this is container 3 and this is container 4. Okay. So you're able to communicate between 3 and 4 and 4 and 3. And at the same time, like you're also able to communicate between 1, 3 and 1, 4. Okay. But you cannot communicate between 3 and 2 or 4 and 2. And at the same time, like you can communicate between 1 and 2. So is this clear? Is it something like awk, pop, karve, pop? So you have like 2 different bridges. This is my bridge and this is custom bridge, I mean the default one. So the default one is actually connected, so container 1 and 2, so they're using default one. Container 1 is also using my bridge. Okay. And at the same time, like 3 and 4 are connected to this thing. So this way, like you'll be able to communicate between 3 and 4 and 3, 1, 4, 1. Okay. So you cannot communicate between 3, 2 and 4, 2. And this one can connect to all these containers 3, 4, 2 because it is sharing all the 2 available bridges. So let's assume like if I created another container, another 2 containers and then another bridge. Okay, so and they are actually pointing to these 2. So these 2 will be isolated from all these items. So this is something like 5 and this is like 6. Okay, so in this case, like 5 can communicate with 6 and 6 can communicate with 5. So they cannot actually communicate with all these items. Okay. Is it clear or any questions or any doubts over here, or did you actually didn't understand?
I have a question, like if there is a connectivity for the
Your voice is a bit low. I'm not able to catch you.
am I audible now?
Yeah, you're audible.
Okay, so if there is a connection for 5, 6 bridge to the third and fourth one, then they can communicate, right?
Yeah, so let's say what you're saying is like if you have a connectivity between these two, 5, 6 are actually connected to this bridge, right?
Yeah.
Yeah.
If it is.
So then they can 5 and 6 can connect with the 3, 4 and also 1.
Okay.
Okay.
Yeah, it's clear.
Okay. Yeah, so this is how usually networking is done. So basically, usually like you'll have something like this. So one application you'll have this is as API server and this one will be like a DB server. So they'll be associated with one network. Okay. So that like this DB is not actually required to be exposed to outside world via an external port or something like that. So they'll just communicate via this bridge. Okay. So an advantage with the named network bridges is something like this. So you'll be able to call with the container name instead of using the IP address. And bridges are not actually used for communication between different hosts. So in order to have communication between containers of different hosts, so you need to use either of these. So you need to use overlay network driver or Mac VLAN driver. Okay, so any other questions or anything? Any questions from this session or previous sessions? Okay, so I don't think so. Like you guys have any questions? So for today, like we'll just end this session, and tomorrow we'll see like how we can actually create an image using like Docker file, and how to push this particular image to Docker Hub. And if time permits, like we'll also see how we can actually make use of Docker Compose. So okay. Okay, guys, like thanks for your time. Like any questions, like let me know. We still have like 1 more minute. So no questions, right? So let's get
No
this
problem.
first. Okay, then. Thank you.
Thank you, Pawan.
Thank you.
Thank you, Pawan.
Yeah, and I shared the Excel sheet list. Okay, so you can actually register like, so if you are interested. So this is the sheet, like I sent it on this particular group and also like Docker developers. So if anyone is actually interested in the hackathon, like hackathon in the sense like it is not actually required to know any of these skills like Node or Express or MongoDB. So we'll just focus on only the Docker basics, Docker things, and we can actually borrow this code like so .NET code or MySQL code from somewhere in the web. Okay. So if anyone is actually interested, like you can actually provide your name over there. Yeah. Thank you guys. Thanks for your time. Bye then.
Bye.
Thank you, Pawan. Bye.
Yeah. Bye.